So, you'll never guess what happened. Thanks, YouTube algorithm. I've already talked about the demo of Balan Wonderworld, and despite being a bit kinder towards it, I still said I thought a delay was in order. Obviously that didn't happen, but that doesn't immediately mean the full version was destined for failure. While the game was too far done to delay, feedback from the demo led to a day 1 patch that would hopefully fix some of the problems, and it's possible that the levels from the demo weren't representative of the full game. So here we are, Balan Wonderworld. I burned through the game in a weekend, sorry Monster Hunter, spent another week going for the Platinum, sorry Monster Hunter, and now I'm here to talk about it. Is it a worthy follow-up to Knights? Is it the callback to 2000s platformers that people were hoping it would be? Or is it trash just like all the YouTube clickbait says? Well, the answers are a bit more nuanced than most people are making them out to be. Of course, since I've talked about Balan before, I gotta disclaim some things. I want to make this stand as a standalone video, so I'll inherently be repeating some of my points about what the game is. However, I'll also be addressing some of the changes, or lack thereof, from the demo. So at a certain point, I'll be assuming that you're at least passingly familiar with the complaints people had about the demo. If you need a quick refresher, the second half of my Knights Balan video is a good place to start. Or you can play the demo yourself. I don't know if it's seen any changes that include the day 1 patch, but it should at the very least be enough to get you up to speed. Balan Wonderworld is a 3D platformer with a pretty simple structure. Chapters are split into 2 acts, where your goal is to make it to the end, platforming, fighting enemies, and solving puzzles along the way. After Act 2, you fight a boss. 3 hits and they're out of there. Then you do a dance number with the character of that chapter, farmer still schmooze, everyone schmooze actually, I guess the Wonderworld gives everyone mad dance skills regardless of their age. Except Leo, he can just do that naturally. Anyways, you rinse and repeat that process for 12 chapters. Getting to the end of a stage doesn't take too long, but in order to make it to new levels, you need to find Balan statues, which are peppered throughout the stages. Some are out in the open and only require reaching them, and some require puzzle solving, but either way you'll need to utilize the skills of the various costumes in order to get them. With all that in mind, Balan Wonderworld isn't a thrill-a-minute fast-paced platformer. Rather, it's a more exploration-based platformer. In order to find the statues, you'll need to take your time, soak in the sights, and find little side paths to track them down. Since a lot of the statues are just about reaching them, it means a lot of them have different means of obtaining them, which is always a method of puzzle solving I appreciate. And the levels are well designed with its secrets. If you take the time to look around, you'll find all kinds of hidden paths, and usually you'll find things if you poke around. Not all the rewards are made equal, usually you'll only find eggs and drops instead of statues, but being rewarded for your exploration is nice, and it's important for an exploration-based platformer. Speaking of the eggs and drops, those contribute to the side objectives. Your hub is the Isle of Tims, and it's inhabited by the Tims, who are just the cutest things. Not quite sure if they're I'm willing to spend $40 for the plush cute, but maybe? If they're around when conventions come back, then I'll take 5. Anyways, the big sub-objective is to fix the Tower of Tims and the Clock of Happiness, and the Tims will help you with that, either by spinning the wheel outside of it, or entering the Rube Goldberg machine that is the tower itself. For them to help though, you'll have to feed them, and that's what the drops are for. You can populate the isle in 2 ways, either through finding eggs in the levels or through breeding. When a Tim eats enough drops, they become a big boy, and by throwing another Tim at them, they'll hatch an egg that way. Of course, this is all optional if you're just trying to beat the game, but there are some advantages to raising your Tims outside of just building the tower. 5 Tims will always join you in a level and help you out, behaving differently depending on their color, which can be influenced by feeding them different colored drops. It's mainly just fighting enemies and collecting items, but it's never a bad idea to have them around. There's plenty of content in Balan Wonderworld as well. Beating the game took me about 10-11 hours, with some of that time being spent taking in the sights and smelling the roses, but there's plenty beyond just that. You're incentivized to go back to each level and use new costumes to find more Balan statues, of which there's a whopping 228, but beyond that, each stage gets an Act 3 after completing the game, which features more challenges, more costumes, and more statues. So there's plenty to collect if you want to go that extra mile. I have, and, well, we'll get back to that in a bit. Now, with all that praise, you might think that the Day 1 patch went and fixed all the problems, but not exactly. Most of what I said were thoughts I had coming from the demo that carried over, so it says more about my taste than the quality of the game. Not to say that there haven't been some improvements though. Most notably, the running speed has been improved, which makes traveling and jumping feel a lot better. It's still not Sonic fast, but this isn't trying to be a Sonic game, so I think it's serviceable. And if the movement speed was your only gripe with the demo, you'll enjoy the full game. I can't speak for if the Switch version saw any graphical or frame rate improvements, but the download size for the game did jump up by 2 gigabytes, so I'd hope so. If not, I'll reiterate what I've said before, it's not ideal or particularly good, but it is at the very least serviceable, and it'll get the job done if it's your only way to experience Balan Wonderworld, and I do mean your only way. As for me, I played on PS5, and it ran super smooth and had those sweet SSD load times, and the adaptive triggers help keep things fresh, even if it's not the cleanest implementation. I have it on good authority that all the other versions run just fine, so don't feel like you're missing out by not playing next gen. But back to my point, the patch fixes some of the problems, but there are still some present. One of the big ones are how the costumes are handled. They serve as your health, you get hit, you lose the costume, simple enough, and there's enough in each stage that you shouldn't have to worry about being without one. If it's one from another stage that you need for a specific puzzle though, then you need to run back to a checkpoint to grab a replacement, and that's annoying. By the way, hold down a button and it'll show up instantly. I don't know if that's common knowledge, but I found that out on accident, so I bet others don't know about it. Anyways, if you just had to backtrack a bit, that wouldn't be too big an issue, but costumes aren't registered for you to freely pick. Rather, the third costume in your inventory gets sent to the changing room once you grab another one, so you're pulling from a backstock. So if you don't have another in stock, you have to go back to the stage in question to grab a spare. Going back to old stages with new costumes to explore and find new statues, that's fun. Going back with the intent of finding a costume to solve a puzzle somewhere else, not so much. Quick side note, some people have talked about how the backtracking is required for progression and citing that as a flaw. It could be a problem, but it doesn't have to be. For the purpose of making this point, I did my first playthrough without backtracking a single time, and seeing if I can make it through the entire game. And I did. The only stage I replayed was the second boss, just to get a read on how obtaining the statues there worked. But other than that, nothing, and I made it to the end of the game with 131 of the required 110 statues. More than enough. I'm not going to pretend that it can't be a problem, but at the very least, if you take your time and search thoroughly without just speeding through, you should be able to cut down on the backtracking, at least until you decide to go for completion. What can't be avoided is the slow speed of changing costumes. Yeah, this is still really slow, and with how often you'll be doing it, you really start to pine for an instant puff of smoke rather than this bombastic spin. But these can still be reasonably patched out. They can make it so you can select any collected costume from checkpoints, and they can add that instant puff of smoke. But there are still problems with Balan Wonderworld that are inherent to its design, particularly its simplicity. The game only uses one button, and each costume has one skill each. Individually, these aren't too bad, but combined, it means that the act of jumping, in a platformer, is tied to certain costumes. Now, for the most part, when you have to use a costume that can't jump, stages are designed with ramps in that so you can get around, but some areas don't, and those areas really suck. Chapter 11. It has this ladder man. He places ladders. Fine enough, but the ladders are only really useful in contextual locations, but they let you use them anywhere, which eats up your jump. And the floor is lava. And even if you can get around, guess what? This costume can't fight either. Come on, you're telling me I can't drop a ladder on a Nagatti's head? That's super slapstick. So in the not unlikely scenario where it's a costume like that you're stuck with, you can't do anything, and that really sucks. On that note, not all costumes are created equal, and I'm mixed on this. There are 80 costumes in the game, a respectable number, but some have similar or exactly the same skills as other costumes, and some are just inherently better than others. Let's look at an example. In Chapter 2 you get this bubble costume, which lets you slowly ride a bubble over pits. Okay, that's cool. In Chapter 6 you get the air cat, same principle, hovering you over pits, but this one lets you jump to get more height and lets you move at running speed. It's been improved, don't laugh, making it objectively better. And in Chapter 8 you get the Frost Fairy, which is the air cat, but each step gives you more height, making it better than the air cat and one of the best costumes in the game. On one hand, it's easy to think of them as upgrades. You get new powers and upgrades that outclass and replace your other stuff in other games all the time. But on the other hand, this does feel like a budgeted decision. I don't know, it's a really weird thing. Also, I don't really have a good place to slot this in, but I hate Balan's Bout. Not the song, song's dope. The whole soundtrack's super good actually. I'm talking about the minigames, I hate these. If they were just bonus like the other minigames, I wouldn't even bother mentioning it. But these are required to get balance statues, and they're kinda stingy with giving them. They're so deceptively easy too. Just hit the button when the shadow lines up, and button mash when there's a bunch of them. Easy. But you need to get all excellence for the statues, and missing it with even one great happens way more often than you'd think. It'd still be annoying, but it wouldn't be so bad if you can just go back in and try again, but it's not that simple. You can go back into stages for drops and costumes, but to respawn Balan's Bout and the rainbow drops, you need to beat the boss again, and yeah, if you miss some statues the first time around, it's not a complete waste of time. But the fact of the matter is, it's still not a quick process, and it's all just for an attempt at something you might still screw up. So it's not that any one part is really hard, it's just that it's so punishing for even the slightest mistake. And the late game has so many of them. At first there's only one bout per stage, but by the end stages can have up to 3, which means more revisits if you screw up, and more stop and go if you go for them on the way. At least they don't take away from the normal statues, there will always be 6 of those, but it can be a daunting task completing all the bouts, and I wouldn't hold it past anyone if that's what keeps them from going for 100%. So yeah, there are still problems, plenty of them, and for some they will be deal breakers, but I still think the game is better than most are portraying. Don't get me wrong, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend this is the best game Balan Wonderworld could have been, but it is at the very least functional. Bars on the floor, I realize that, but all the choices in how the game is structured and played work by design, regardless of how questionable those choices are. And of course I listed all those issues, and yeah, they are present in the main game, but they only really become major problems when going for 100% completion. And in all fairness, I can't really think of a 3D platformer that wasn't at least a little bit tedious to complete, so that's par for the course. Though yeah, 100%ing the game is really annoying, especially some of the trophies, since some elements rely on random chance. The hats mean nothing. If you know, you know. But during my 29 hours with Balan Wonderworld, most of my grievances came in from the 18 I spent going for completion, not the 11 I spent casually playing through the game. If you're willing to accept that, if you have no intention of going that extra mile and seeing everything, you'll find a functioning, if not always thrilling, 3D platformer, and I think the inevitable worst game of 2021 claims will probably be better deserved elsewhere, or the rest of the year will be a banger if this is the worst game it'll give us. Of course, this game is also meant to be a spiritual successor to Nights in the Dreams, so people will be judging it with that in mind as well. Nights was this weird 2.5D arcade type flying game, and yeah, on that merit, Balan's transition to a not terribly remarkable 3D platformer means it would fail right out of the gate. But the gameplay is only one part of Nights, and I'd argue the other parts of Nights, those being its aesthetic and its themes, are just as important to its identity. And with that in mind, Balan Wonderworld at the very least gets a passing grade. While dreams aren't the focus anymore, the worlds themselves are still dreamlike in quality, with some imaginative designs that make them distinct amongst each other. Yeah, there are some archetypes, there's a grass world, water world, ice world, but there are some elements that make those unique. World 1, for instance, while serving as the grass world, utilizes farm elements like fields of crops and giant corn cobs to spice it up. World 2 is a water world, but rather than going for a beach theme, it goes for a more deep-sea underwater ruins look, which is cool, and while World 8 is the token ice level, areas of it give off a town covered in snow rather than an Antarctic feel, so there's still some distinct identity there. The story too hits those Nights vibes, and yeah, there's still no spoken dialogue, or at the very least, there isn't much in the way of explaining most elements, but it is there, and I think it's done pretty well. Balan Wonderworld is a story about happiness, about the things that make us happy, how we might stand to lose them, and how we can reclaim them, and this is shown through the lenses of 12 different characters. Each of them has different backgrounds, but regardless, the things that ail them are incredibly human and relatable. Struggles like being unable to share what we love with others, losing sight of why we love something, getting stuck in a rut, or heck, just a string of bad luck. All incredibly real things that can feasibly happen to anybody, and the solutions to those conflicts, be finally being able to share what we love, finding new purpose, and reigniting the flames of our passions, breaking out of that rut, or just picking up the pieces and starting again. It makes them all the more satisfying and all the easier to relate to. In my case, I'm not a world-class artist whose livelihood hinges on the content I create, but I do create, and creative burnout is something I have dealt with, and seeing a character on screen suffer the same issue and overcome it, it's something that resonates with me personally, and I think anyone can see themselves in any of these characters and resonate with their struggles and be a bit inspired by the resolutions, and I think that has merit. I do have some issues with the story though. Okay, most of them are nitpicks, but for one, I don't really care for the chapter titles, or I don't really care for when they're shown. The instant you enter a chapter, you see the title, and these don't really leave much in the way of imagination. And they reveal the conflict before there's really any chance to think about what it is. Besides that, I don't really like how all the story for a chapter is backloaded at the end of it. You clear Act 2, you get the cutscene introducing the conflict, you fight the boss, get the dance number, and then you see the resolution. It all happens a bit too fast, and I think it may make it harder for people to connect with these characters when their entire stories span about 5 minutes. I think it would have been better to split the initial cutscene into two. Either at the beginning or end of Act 1, show a cutscene introducing the character and the thing that makes them happy, and at the end of Act 2, show what causes them to lose sight of it. Spreading it out like this gives it a more traditional structure. We see what these characters have that makes them happy, and by giving an entire act to think about that, you feel more when they're at risk of losing it. But those are all nitpicks about how the story is presented, not the content itself. But the content I do have an issue with pertains to the main characters. Now, to talk about this, I will have to spoil the ending of Balan Wonderworld, so if anything I've said up to this point piqued your interest, or if you want to go into Wonderworld unspoiled, go to the timestamp on screen. I said in the last video that Emma and Leo are good stand-ins for Elliot and Claris, and on the surface, yeah, that is correct. The two clearly have some issues that are troubling them deeply, and going into the Wonderworld and journeying with Balan should fix that. But they have almost the exact opposite problem of all the other characters. Or maybe it's the same problem? They get their respective opening cutscenes, they get their unique endings, but nothing happens in between. Balan Wonderworld isn't a story about fixing Emma and Leo's hearts, it's a story about fixing the hearts of others, and Emma and Leo finding happiness is just a thing that happens along the way. Well, one can argue that Knights has the same problem, but the development of Elliot and Claris is there. You only need to look at the level Twin Seeds to see that. At the very start, they're cast away from Knights, and with no other option, they take a leap of faith and jump when they begin to fly. Throughout the entire game, they had to rely on Knights to fly, but that one moment shows they have the courage to do it themselves, and that courage carries them to the endings, where they face what ails them with their newfound courage, overcoming them with the skills they've always had. It's simple, but it is there. Emma and Leo never get that leap of faith moment. I suppose there is one if we assume Lance's final form is representative of what ails the two of them. Then when they're knocked down by the unavoidable blast, they get back up to face it rather than running away, as the opening cutscene shows them leaving the areas causing them strife. But even then, there's nothing as concrete as the moment from Twin Seeds. And then there's the farewell with Balan, and I don't know, I know this is supposed to be a moment that tugs at the heartstrings, but without any characterization it feels kinda weak. Maybe the novel is better at that, but as it stands, Emma and Leo aren't defined enough to make these moments in the story as impactful as they want them to be. With that in mind, other than accommodating for multiplayer, it makes me wonder why Balan wasn't the main character for all the difference it would make for the bulk of the story. Or maybe that's intentional, Balan's a maestro and their goal is to lead. So it's not them who's fixing the hearts of others, it's Leo and Emma, and if they're supposed to be stand-ins for the player, it's meant to show that many of us can be the light that can help people through difficult times. I don't know, I haven't really pinned down a reading that I'm fully satisfied with yet, but I guess the fact that it has me thinking at all is still a good sign. Editor's note, in the 5 days I spent not editing this like the good content creator I am, I did read the Balan Wonderworld novel, and it was pretty good. It didn't fix all the problems, and it has a few unique ones of its own. Emma still doesn't have much of a presence, there's a plot thread that's left up to interpretation, and it kinda just stops rather than ends, but it's still solid. Leo gets some more characterization, all the characters get some solid moments, save Emma, and the specifics of how the Wonderworld works are better explained. If you like the themes and ideas of Balan Wonderworld but either don't want to spend $60 on the game, or felt that some of the elements from the game's story were lacking, I'd recommend checking out the novel. In case this gets misinterpreted, I do think Knights is the better game between the two. It isn't as long as Balan Wonderworld, but it uses the time that it has to deliver a tighter experience on the whole. And my point here isn't to say that you're wrong if you didn't enjoy Balan Wonderworld. We all look for different things in the media we consume, and I'm sorry you couldn't find what you were looking for here. But there are things to like, and if you're willing and able to look past the simplicity and design quirks, you might even find something you love. If you're on the fence, wait for a sale, absolutely, and it will go on sale. Not because it's bad, but because it's a AAA video game, and they all do that. But I feel like once the price comes down and time passes a bit, the overall consensus on Balan Wonderworld will soften a bit. And love or hate the game, I think everyone can agree that this shouldn't be the end for Balan, even if it doesn't use video games as the medium in the future. Balan Company clearly has passion for the stories they want to tell and the world they created, and I hope everyone agrees that a world with this much creativity and heart is worthy of an encore, wherever or whatever it may be.